if anyone has seen this though, that there was a bunch of WhatsApp messages leaked before the party conference, essentially completely undermining Sunak. I think it's quite funny, again, that the Conservative Party are infighting as hard as Labour is supposed to infight, right? And it's grassroots Tories are vowing to go to war with the party's Liberals. They want to oust Rishi Sunak and go to war with the Liberal wing of the party and leaked WhatsApp messages from the Conservative Democratic Organisation, so Crankfest 2023. But apparently they're like a Johnson-backed, right? Which is really weird, because all of the stuff that they hate Sunak for are the things that like kind of Johnson stood for. Like Boris Johnson is like a left-wing Conservative in the same way that people like Rachel Reeves are right-wing Labour politicians. So it's really weird that they're so massively enamoured by Boris Johnson despite the fact that he doesn't espouse any of their values really and truly. The group has high-profile support from senior figures on the right of the Conservative Party. In its conference in May, featured speeches from Priti Patel, Jacob Rees-Mogg and Nadine Dorries. The leaked WhatsApps show vitriol among some of its members aimed at Sunak, little expectation of victory in the general election, and a desire to take back control of the party for the right post-election. A Tory source said it was wrong to characterise Mr Sunak as being on the Liberal wing of the party, saying he's significantly more conservative than Boris Johnson, which is exactly 100% true, both on economics, social issues, climate change, foreign policy. Like, he's more liberal than Sunak, 100% Boris Johnson is, but he's just not cranky enough. He's not enough of a crank for these people. The fact that, you know, he's distancing himself from the kind of Suella Braverman 14-word style shit that she was saying the other day. And this weird, again, what I was talking about when with regards to this war on motorist stuff, is that there's this genuine belief from members of the public that Rishi Sunak is an agent of the World Economic Forum. Hence why he's so insistent on banning 15-minute cities and low traffic neighbourhoods and traffic filters and all that kind of malarkey. Because I think they must have known, their communications department must know, that there's people both inside the party and out who are kind of natural Conservative voters who think for some reason, that Rishi Sunak wants to stop Brexit when he voted for Brexit and supported it beforehand, whereas Boris Johnson did it cynically, having repudiated it before. And they love Boris, which is really strange. Yet Sunak was always for Brexit, was the one who organised the current Brexit deal that we have to ensure continuity and to save Brexit, but it's not Brexity enough because it doesn't violate the Good Friday Agreement, which is what the Brexiteers clearly want. And because he's not pushed back hard enough against the conspiracy theory stuff that the World Economic Forum lunatics want to engage in, they will somehow say that he is a globalist and a WEF puppet for going to Davos or whatever it is. I don't think he even went to Davos, did he? I'm not even sure. But it's a really weird position that he's kind of been forced into, because so many of the Conservative base are now just like out-and-out QAnon-style conspiracy theorists about the World Economic Forum. The kind of people I was talking about before, these middle-class people who were very happy whilst unfettered capitalism was eating the wealth and the assets of poor people. But now the poor people have no assets. This kind of devouring monstrosity of capital and corporate greed is now coming from middle-class assets, but because these middle-class people are so sold on capitalism, they can't understand that this is the nature of the system that they support, because they're so, like, balls deep into capitalist ideology. They've sunk so much cost into capitalism as an ideology. They can't ever blame capitalism for the failings. They can only say that capitalism is failing because it's being undermined somehow. So they create a deus ex machina. They create a persona non grata. They create a scapegoat to blame the failures of capitalism on, a fifth column that's interfering to ruin everything, and they've picked the World Economic Forum because the World Economic Forum are like capitalists who are trying to change the world to mitigate the negative externalities of capitalism, or they'll call it crony capitalism, exactly. And it's these kind of middle class people who just refuse to realise that maybe it's their ideology that's bad rather than individuals are bad, because they're liberals. Liberals don't believe in materialism. They can never anticipate what a structure might do. They can only think in terms of what individuals do, or what a cabal of individuals might do. So they can only believe that there is a single person who is actively trying to do something, rather than understanding the nature of the incentive structures behind a system and how that might shape policy and shape the economy and shape the future. And because they're seeing the entropic nature of society fall apart under unregulated capitalism, unfettered capitalism, neoliberal capitalism, they're grasping at straws, and they are grasping onto the World Economic Forum. They're liberals moving towards fascism because fascism is built on the backs of a frustrated middle class. Exactly, Comrade Chuck, 100%. You're absolutely right. And this is the conspiracy theory that they've latched onto, where in America they latch onto QAnon. In America, they latch onto the Save the Children stuff. In the UK, they've latched onto the World Economic Forum, which, to be fair, happens in America as well, but it's more prominent here, I think. That's why Farage and Tice and Reform UK people, they always talk about globalists specifically, because it's their dog whistle for the World Economic Forum and, of course, other certain minorities. And people inside the Tory party, some reason, think so as well, despite the fact that he's never shown any actual allegiance to real World Economic Forum policy. But then again, the WEF conspiracy theorists think that any pro-climate policy is being forced top down by the World Economic Forum because they don't believe in climate change, and they believe it's just an excuse that's been created out of nowhere just to control people rather than a real problem that requires solution. So until Rishi Sunak abandons net zero, does this referendum on net zero that Nigel Farage wants, they're not going to believe him because they're so far down the rabbit hole that even pushing back net zero isn't good enough because it still admits that net zero is a thing. So it's a real humdinger, and this is why we're getting this war on motorist shtick from Rishi Sunak, because the car brain people are the same middle class people that are now the conspiracy theorists, frustrated by the failure of capitalism to deliver them the prosperity that they expected, or at least expected post 2010, which never materialised. Several of the messages sow the anger felt towards other wings of the Conservative Party. One activist said, "It's time to go to war. Unfortunately, it's with the Liberals in the party. It needs to be done we need the party back," which is silly, because it's the kind of the supposed liberalism of the Conservative Party that granted them victory in 2010 and 2015 and sort of in 2017. It was the liberal wing that moved towards some kind of cosy conservatism, which punished poor people but not minorities as much as they usually would, or at least optically, even if materially they did, that won them all these elections. The crank politics of the Conservative Party has never been shown to be an election-winning machine, so they don't want to do it. They shouldn't want to do it, but they are so bereft of ideas because their singular strong point, which is the economy, can now not be relied on. So they have to find some other kind of culture war to run on, or fascistic policy to run on, hence why we had Suella Braverman going all Enoch Powell on us the other day. Listening to my local party's WhatsApp broadcast is like the last days of Rome, carrying on with the same old policies they have lost year after year, ignoring actual conservatives and a conservative message, preferring to appear liberal to appease the middle-class liberal climate guilt voters. Personally, I can't see past the cowardice. I'm pretty sure that's all the public see too. But these people, these middle-class liberal climate guilt voters, they're a large part of the electorate that will decide the election. And you trying to say, well, the public back this? Well, no, this is the man who committed to a bunch of the climate goals. Boris Johnson built a coalition on this stuff, and you're ripping up that coalition. It's very strange that they want a return of Boris Johnson, and all of the things that they hate about the World Economic Forum are supported by Boris Johnson. New rail lines, climate action, increasing the size of the state, new state expenditure. It's a really incoherent ideology these people cling to. Selective populism, well, that's true, yeah. Members of the group mocking Mr. Sunak, one saying he has the charisma of a doorknob, another says he's uninspiring, and saying the government can't get anything right, and characteristic as a party of globalists. They believe that Sunak, who voted for Brexit, is governing like a Remainer, despite the fact that he's not. You need to rethink Rishi and Powell's. Remainers have a firm hold on the party, which is why that they've had Brexiteer, pro-Brexit policy for every single Prime Minister. Like, the only actual pro-Remain Prime Minister was Theresa May. And even then, she was one who did the red lines that got us hard Brexit in the first place. Return of Boris Johnson, trampling democracy, giving up winning the election. I mean, what it tells you is that they feel their electoral fortune sinking and are grasping at straws, as well as clinging on to their personal ideology, which, you know, it's fair. You want your party to represent your ideology or beliefs. I don't necessarily disagree with that. Same thing's happening in Labour, except the Labour left are more in tune with the general public than the Conservative right are, which tells me that if there's going to be some kind of future battle for the Conservative Party, it makes sense, right? I've been talking about what time the election's going to happen for a while. I have this hunch. I don't have strong evidence of this, but I have a hunch, right? I know that Rishi Sunak's put the councils on high alert for some election soon. I think it might happen this year. I think we might get a November election. First of all, it's clear Rishi Sunak is having a party in turmoil. He's lost control of the party. And what happens usually is you have to try and force the party to unite to save your own skin and keep you in power. And calling an election is a way to do that. Because if they don't get behind Rishi when he calls the election, the party is even toaster than they already are. The run response to this you get is like, well, no justice. Look at polls. Labour are 15 points ahead. The Conservatives would get wiped out. Not necessarily wiped out completely, but they'll get a really, really bad result. And you can see from the WhatsApps that that's what's believed amongst them. But things will get worse. If they want to carry the impetus of these new policy platforms platforms. They want to run the election on them now, whilst Labour are caught off guard with no real manifesto yet, with just some vague NPF commitments, for example. Not even all of the constituencies have PPCs yet. You'd catch Labour off guard if he called the election now. Rishi Sunak would save his own skin. And as far as how much damage limitation the Conservatives can do, they can run on the culture war stuff about motorists or whatever. They avoid doing the election next spring, which would mean people would have the winter NHS crisis still in their minds. They would avoid waiting until everyone's on new mortgage rates, which is a big driver of people turning from Conservative to Labour, as an issue with mortgage rates and pensions. So before all of the people are on the new rate, they could get the election in. And also, if people are still predicting a recession in 2024 Q1, they don't want to call an election just after a recession or during a recession. You want to call the election before the recession and then live the election into the hands of Labour. Leave it for them to deal with. Be in a position to be able to attack them later on. So it makes sense for them to call it now. The other thing as well is that it further hamstrings Labour on policy. So the main control over Labour's spending plans is inflation. We can't do fiscal expansion, you'll fuel inflation. You can't have better wages for workers, that will fuel inflation. If they wait until spring next year, inflation will have gone. Labour won't have any reason to justify not spending any money. So Labour, they probably won't do it because of Reeves and Starmer's fiscal rules, but they would have the ability, even if it's not in the manifesto, it might surreptitiously sneak its way in if some kind of turn to the left happens. They can't do that if inflation is still high. So in terms of the poison chalice you're handing to Labour, it will be worse if they did it now rather than in spring. They would hand a more screwed up poison chalice. The only thing that makes me think the other side about that is that they need time to stop the boats as far as they're concerned. They need time to bring down the debt. And none of these things are happening. Their promises for bringing down the debt and stopping the boats. Only 7% of the country think that Sunak is doing a good job at stopping the boats. They need to have some kind of success on their flagship policy before they call an election. That's what's stopping them at the moment, I think. Would Rishi call it in his speech? Well, that's what I'm thinking. It would be a real curveball if the week before the Labour conference, you throw them into the wolves and say, there's going to be election now. You're now doing an election conference that you've not prepared for, which would be another curveball for Labour. It makes sense for them to call it now. They probably won't, because the Conservatives probably will hope for a next year miracle that will improve their polling. But I would look at the impetus they have now. The polls are closing slightly now, which they would go further if there was a recession. It would go further if inflation didn't come down. It would go further if people were on new mortgage rates. The more tired people get of the incumbent government. I think it would be, given what we know about Gordon Brown, I think it would be very shrewd to minimise Conservative losses to call the election now. And he might call it in a speech. And again, I think it would be morally the right thing to do. They have no mandate for the changes they want to do. If they want to completely rip up the Johnson manifesto, they have to build another one and then take it to the election. It's as simple as that. That's my summary of the potentiality for a new election off the back of what we know about the state of the economy, the state of the Conservative Party, the internal factionalism, and Rishi's naked desire for power. That's what my thoughts and what I think.